Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's David Sequeira, and I'm the director of the Margaret Lawrence Gallery. I'm also the person who has the privilege of putting together the Art Forum program for the Victorian College of the Arts. And before I introduce our guest speaker, Ted Snell, please join me in taking a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which you're located today. And for most of us in southeastern Victoria, it's the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And to acknowledge that for generations before museums and studios and universities were established on this land, that actually those traditional custodians practiced song and dance and visual arts and storytelling, and that those traditions and those rituals continue today. And please join me in paying respects to elders past, present and emerging, and welcoming any First Nations people from around the world to joining us today. So our guest speaker, Ted Snell, Professor Ted Snell, is the director of the Lawrence Wilson Art Gallery at the University of Western Australia. Over the past 3 decades, he's contributed to the National Arts Agenda as chair of the Visual Arts Board of the Australia Council, Artbank, the Asialink Visual Arts Advisory Committee, the University Art Museums of Australia, and as a board member of the National Association for the Visual Arts. He is currently on the board of the University of Queensland Art Museum, the Fremantle Biennale, and he's chair of Regional Arts Western Australia. He's been a commentator on the arts for the ABC Radio and Television and Perth art reviewer for the Australian, and he's a regular contributor to local and national journals. And one thing that Ted didn't include on his biography, or it's actually 2 things, is that all of the things that I've just spoken about regarding Ted are really born from a love of art, a love of making art, studio experience. And learning through making is just such an important part of his life and his family's life, and certainly been a huge inspiration to me and many, many people around Australia. The title of his talk is Mirror and Lens, the Arts as Agents of Change in the Time of Coronavirus. Wherever you are, please make Ted welcome.
Thank you very much, David. Yes, and I'm speaking to you today from Whadjuk Noongar land, and I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people and all traditional owners, as you've said, David, as the spiritual and cultural custodians of their country, which always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Can I have my screen share up now? Ash, is that possible?
Yep, just go there.
Okay, fantastic. Just need to start play. Thank you very much, David, for that very generous introduction. It's my great pleasure to be here on this forum today. And I thank you all, those of you who have registered. I'm very honoured to be involved in this project. But I have to say I'm also deeply saddened today, saddened that my colleague and friend Kate Dorr is not here to share it with us all. Vale, Kate, you are sorely missed, and I would have so enjoyed our banter following this talk had you been with us. Art has always been both a mirror and a lens, and that is why we know as much as we do about previous generations. Novels and paintings and films and garments and artifacts and buildings and the other products of human creativity are the tools that we use to understand the experience of those who have lived before. Art reflects back to us who we are, what we love, and also what concerns us. And at the same time, it's a lens that focuses our attention, it provides clarity and detail, and it zooms in on what is otherwise unseen or overlooked. In these difficult and dangerous times, as we negotiate life in a pandemic, the contribution of artists is even more important, and their role in building a future that profits from this experience is vital. Today, I'd like to examine how our art museums are dealing with the impact of the pandemic and how artists are critiquing and contextualizing the experience. I also want to explore some of the possible long-term consequences of this crisis And I know you probably think, oh, this sounds so Armageddon, particularly with this image of Bruegel on the screen. So before you switch off, let me say that in addition, I believe there is a great deal to celebrate that has emerged from this time of disruption and dislocation. So it won't be all doom and gloom, not a bit of it. Firstly, artists have responded immediately to the situational change imposed by COVID-19. And this disruption has great opportunities for the future. We are now, literally right now, using Zoom to collaborate and find new ways to share information that is inclusive and expansive in ways that were not encouraged nor really widely employed previously. Going beyond spatial and temporal boundaries, individuals from widely different backgrounds are, with different experiences, linked through technology to develop shared goals and opportunities. Artists are now able to contribute in ways that we haven't previously imagined, and I am sure that this will continue. Isolation has created new spaces that are the domain of the arts. Social distancing has created all manner of personal spaces where we have the time and, through the available technology, the mechanism to listen to music, to watch films, and to view artworks on our various devices. And as we'll see, many artists are using these opportunities to reach out to new audiences and find new modes of engagement and employment. Crucially, within the spaces of COVID-19, the social value of art is highlighted by the ways in which it will bring communities together, provide added quality and also enjoyment to life. Artists have a major impact on a community's health and sense of well-being, and musicians and visual artists have responded well to the crisis, in fact, very well. When the museums around the world shuttered up early in 2020, the impact was dramatic. Overnight, we inhabited André Malraux's Museum Without Walls. With gallery access denied, we had to rely on the Musée Imaginaire, a repository of reproducible art held in memory, carried in data files, and stored in the cloud. That resource was mined very successfully, as we've seen over and over again in the past 6 months in projects such as the Getty Museum Challenge and Thyssen Kunst in Quarantine, which have encouraged a direct engagement with works of art that have generated new and more involved audiences. And huge numbers of people have played music in online performances, events in apartment blocks, through internet concerts, and isolated shared performances like the I Heart Living Room benefit concert featuring, amongst others, the Rolling Stones. Isolated individuals have responded creatively to their situation, reaching out in innovative ways to make contact, to seek guidance, and in the process, most importantly, to build community. This direct creative engagement and embrace of creative practice has the potential to shape future arts activity, and I'm sure it will. As the past 6 months have shown, we need the arts more than ever in a time of crisis. In the aftermath of the Second World War, many major European cities with essential services unsecured and the streets reduced to rubble, a sad reminder of once functioning urban communities, they chose to invest in a future based on a solid foundation of art and culture. Oh, thank you. On a solid foundation of art and culture. Limited and highly contested funds were allocated to reaffirm the values that they had fought for. It was seen as vital for future health and well-being, a catalyst that would ignite the flame of innovation, self-confidence, and optimism. Although still on rations, cities like Edinburgh and Avignon began their arts festivals in 1947. London presented the Festival of Britain in 1951, and Berlin, its first film festival, in the same year. Just 2 years later, in 1953, the Festival of Perth was presented on the grounds of the University of Western Australia. And concurrently, festivals that had opened before the war were revived, the Venice Biennale and Cannes Film Festival amongst them. This acknowledged need for cultural engagement, for a vibrant arts community, is as urgent now as it was following the global calamity of the Second World War. Australia needs an arts sector that can reflect back its anxieties, reaffirm its hopes, and imagine possible futures. The power of artworks to be transformative and to reshape lives is needed now more than ever. As Tolstoy reminds us, the arts are indispensable for the life and progress toward well-being of individuals and of humanity at large. We all know that. But as so often happens in the arts, I am preaching today to the converted. And I don't want to oversell what we all know to be true. But as we progress today, I will try to address how we can best present our case to a wider public, including our politicians. Because the situation is grim for artists. Much of the public, much of the infrastructure on which careers and incomes were built has been eroded. And the frailties of the gig economy has been exposed, well and truly. The arts are a weather vane. They spin wildly in the gusts of a robust financial climate, yet they are the first to stall in the economic doldrums. When money is tight, the first funding curtailed is that allocated to the arts and entertainment. Consequently, the reaction to COVID-19 was abrupt. Many events, festivals, performances, exhibitions were cancelled, and theatres, venues and galleries were closed. As roughly 2/3 of the country's artists and art workers are employed as casuals or sole traders, the impact on their fragile economies was severe and immediate. The website I Lost My Gig reported on the 20th of May that lost income had reached $340 million and impacted the lives of over 650,000 artists and art workers. And that was May. This is a massive body blow to the sector. But as we know from previous experiences of wars and global financial crises and natural disasters, that while the impact is immediate, rebuilding is always slow and extremely painful. The arts are the last to pick up as the winds of fortune begin to build into a healthy breeze. So how do we harness what is positive from the current disruptions? And how can we use the experiences of the past 6 months to shape a more productive and sustainable future for the arts? If you look back here, 57.2 in May had concerns about the future. With JobKeeper and JobSeeker about to end at the end of this month, I'm sure that figure must have increased exponentially. For visual artists, a gallery system that sustains and nurtures careers and provides a source of income has been a key platform. Yet it has been decimated by COVID-19. Although many public galleries were able to quickly marshal their resources and provide access to a range of downloadable assets, we are all aware that this is only a stopgap. As Amit Sood, who masterminded Google Arts, said in 2015, we cannot replicate the physical experience, and we don't want to, but at least let's try and give people a sense of magic. And behind closed doors, the staff at galleries across the country have recalibrated their projects and reimagined how to provide their audiences with equivalent experiences that offer an authenticity not reliant on Walter Benjamin's aura, that intrinsic quality of artworks that cannot be communicated through mechanical means of reproduction. Many galleries have brought together a wide range of materials to provide inspiration for their audiences and access to their collections, offering a richness and density of experience for researchers, general audiences, and students alike. Yet despite the opportunities for magnification and close focus study, as you can see with this Judy Watson, there is still a sense of dislocation when we feel we are engaging with these sort of decontextualized digital rectangles set within a pixelated screen. Faced with social distancing constraints, all galleries are hoping to provide something more than just a surrogate experience. Some, like QUT Art Museum and the Lawrence Wilson Art Gallery and many others, have adopted high-res 360-degree camera formats that offer an approximation of standing at fixed points throughout the gallery to zoom in on individual works or installations. While allowing a degree of independence, the fluidity and spatial orientation of a video walkthrough are most definitely missing. So at the Lawrence Wilson, we've been experimenting with slow TV tours of current exhibitions, which situate viewers within the exhibition space to create a greater sense of being present. However, anybody who has visited a gallery knows a great deal of enjoyment is the result of a cocktail of coffee and conversation, cake, inspiration, stimulation, and information. The plethora of public programs hosted each day across the country in galleries is a source of education and intellectual stimulation for a broad and diverse audience. With closure during COVID-19, art galleries have been trialling innovative approaches to presenting these programs. The UQ Art Museum has held Zoom symposia, attracting audiences across the nation to hear speakers and participate in conversations around current topics. This was part of their We Need to Talk About series. And the Ian Potter's Into Your Collection and Up from the Vault series offered insights into their collection, as did Flinders University's Museum of Art Take 5 series. Not to mention, of course, the Art Forum, which is hosted by the VCA, and Flinders and UTS, who right at this moment, concurrently, are running a virtual symposium. Art galleries are vital to the arts ecology because they work closely with artists to create opportunities for creative expression. And one result of the closure of galleries across the country has been the erosion of opportunities for artists to earn a living and to generate new work. One response by Griffith University Art Museum has been a series of virtual studio tours located within their lockdown studio series that explore how artists are managing their studios during this period of isolation. And RMIT Gallery's New Abnormal exhibition or project explores artists' response to isolation, anxiety, and the lack of motivation caused by this unprecedented upheaval in their lives. These initiatives have kept artists engaged, and it has also provided some funding for the development of new work. For museum professionals, artists, and the wider community alike, these innovations pose the question of what generates Amit Sood's sense of magic. Whatever the add-ons and additions, what all commentators agree upon is the need to refocus on the artworks themselves, fueled by that sense of being in contact with the artist, of standing between them and their unique work, created years, decades, or even centuries earlier. As Nick Mitzovich, director of the National Gallery of Australia, says, what can't be replaced is spending time with a work of art. This engagement with historic works, encouraged by Thyssen-Kunst and the Getty Challenge, is an insight into how artists want to seek out and creatively interact with works of art. And one thing that we have learned about Benjamin's theory of aura is that reproduction does not erode the allure of artworks. Indeed, there's evidence that this magnetism increases with every reproduction. As Sood explained in another interview, the more digital has embraced culture, culture has embraced digital. And this is certainly true with this work by Alex Sprengberg's Sound of White, which was installed in our 2018 Here and Now exhibition and attracted significant footfall after exposure on social media. Once reopened, we can assume that local crowds will flock back to our galleries in even greater numbers. But for the galleries and for the artists who show in these galleries, the expectations of audiences has been fed a healthy diet of virtual and actual experiences that will put even greater pressure on those institutions and the artists they work with to create innovative digital collateral to accompany their exhibitions and so provide multi-platform, multi-sensorial and multivalent experiences. Of course, this is potentially another expectation and imposition on artists that will impact on their incomes and, of course, how they manage their time. In response to forced closure, the commercial gallery sector has also cranked up its retail alternatives, from fledgling prototypes, Art Basel's viewing rooms, and the proliferation of online auctions and sales rooms have sought to keep the market alive, and simultaneously, artists able to afford rent and food. And this is also likely to continue. Those artists who built their careers through social media platforms and digital marketing strategies, such as Amalia Ullmann and Lina Iris Victor, are seen as harbingers of innovation, identifying markets that did not previously exist and concurrently managing a segue into established markets and sales channels. This heightened collaboration may well be one of the enduring outcomes of the COVID-19 disruptions, as the gallery-client relationship is transformed through access to digital portals, and where the artist-gallerist and their audiences are establishing new mechanisms for building commercial relationships. In March, as a response to the lack of opportunity to earn a living, UK-based Matthew Burrows established Artist Support Pledge. It went global, connecting artists with communities who committed to an equitable and sustainable economy for artists and makers of all countries, media, and ethnicities. Using Instagram, artists and makers can post images of their work with a price no more than £200 or equivalent. And if people are interested in buying, they message the artist directly. When the artist reaches £1,000, they commit to buying £200 worth of work from other artists. The success of this venture has opened up the options for artists to work collaboratively within the system and to generate new relationships. This change is not before time. After all, the commercial gallery as we know it is a creation of the late 19th century, when the Impressionist artists rejected from the salon were taken up by a young entrepreneur named Paul Durand-Ruel, seeing an opportunity in the marketplace. It is therefore appropriate that this current disruption will instigate a similar readjustment, leading to a transformation of the art market as we know it. This is a time of revision, when we recalibrate our modus operandi as visual arts professionals and look to those new modes of commercial exchange. After surviving this global catastrophe, and we will survive, we will also have the insight of that trauma, which gives us the opportunity to revalue our priorities and restructure our operations. What will we choose to retain? What will we be brave enough to discard? Will we be seduced by a return to the status quo? Or have we had the courage to realise that for many, and especially Indigenous Australians, normality maintains disadvantage, as Noongar elder Jim Morrison reminds us. In this climate, it would be retrograde for our galleries to offer the same formula of exhibitions that commit resources to anything made elsewhere by artists whose ubiquity defines the first decade of the 21st century. What, for instance, is the future of the blockbuster, the Biennale, and the art fair formats in a post-COVID-19 world? The idea of the International Art Exhibition has flourished since the Venice Biennale was founded in 1895, and they have continued to proliferate in the last 2 decades as the contemporary art field has gone global. Now their fate is linked to the big question of how cultural industries and cultural habits will emerge from the pandemic. The crisis in particular threatens art fairs, which are driven by an art market facing great uncertainty. And what about those global ecosystems of workshops and residencies that have become so vital to establishing the careers of contemporary artists? When travel is no longer easy and, or most likely, severely curtailed, will these events, opportunities, and agencies flounder? Perhaps we will begin to shift our focus and showcase artists in our own community, rather than helicopter in global stars to entertain and titillate us before they fly off to repeat their performance at another destination. Festivals can bring a lens onto the local community of artists and provide them with the resources to optimally present their work and give them the same respect that we heap on others from outside. There is already evidence of this happening. In 2020, this year, Ian Granditch's first Festival of Perth included 2,286 participating artists, and more than 75% of them were based in Western Australia. That percentage is likely to increase in 2021 because next festival will be an extremely local focus. But what a fantastic option that is. For example, the Lawrence Wilson Art Gallery will showcase the work of a remarkable Western Australian artist, Olga Chironas, who has been making significant art for 4 decades, but has never had the major survey exhibition or a published monograph. The opportunity to leverage this level of professional focus is a wonderful fillip, not only for Olga, but for all West Australian artists. And the John Curtin Gallery is doing a similar survey of the work of Abdul Rahman Abdullah, which will give him the space and the resources to show his work to a local audience. Because despite being included in major national exhibitions, many of his works have not been seen in Perth. For example, this work on the screen at the moment. This is Pretty Beach, which was installed as a feature of the National at the MCA in 2019, but has not previously or not at all been shown in Western Australia. Now, of course, there have been previous examples of the local focus, Melbourne Now in 2013 being a prime example. And we would be foolish to retreat into a myopic jingoism by turning inward and ignoring global developments. But this acknowledgement of local practice is one positive outcome from the shifting focus that's provided by COVID-19. For individual artists, time alone in the studio is nothing new. Indeed, without the interruptions of external work, it has been something of a boon for many. It's also been an opportunity to reach out, as Oliver Eliasson has done, to Italian friends and family and to the wider community, encouraging us all to use our time in isolation to learn to be more caring and connected to each other and to the world. In a similar way, Kent Morris reaches out to the residents of St Kilda on a digital billboard at the intersection of Grey and Fitzroy Streets to bring hope and comfort. Between the billboard's commercial advertisement, "Never Alone," appears every 3 minutes, a statement of reassurance set into a geometric pattern he developed from the image of a night heron. And Mark Quinn's response to the social, private and communal upheavals of COVID-19 has created a personal visual diary of the global health emergency, which he is sharing on the internet through Facebook. And there are myriad examples that are a catalyst for recalling what transpired in 2020, and in the future, they will provide a record of what happened. In the same way that we look to Edvard Munch's 1919 self-portraits as a chronicle of the Spanish flu. This is both the mirror and the lens of art, which reflects back to the world and also digs deep to magnify what forces are at work driving change. Although painted before the pandemic and shown in the Armory show in New York in March, Abdul Abdullah's prescient Custodians uses a raging sea as a metaphor for the unknown ahead. Dark and treacherous, he explains, it roars as an obstacle between where we are and where we want to be. Whether the literal obstacle of a person crossing an ocean to seek refuge from war, or the seas swallowing our coasts, to the personal journeys we undertake each day, to overcoming the challenges that stand between us and our goals. And to that, of course, we can add facing COVID-19 and ensuring we not only survive, but prosper. So in the light of these changes, how do we argue for the role of the arts and ensure ongoing support for artists in a community that is under great social and economic stress? Financially, the arts contribute significantly to the economy. It's reported that cultural activities across all forms of engagement generates $112 billion, which is 6.4% of GDP, and it employs roughly 600,000 people. If Australia is to rebuild, it cannot leave the arts to languish. While packages were delivered to industry and to the retail sector, many artists fell through the cracks, leaving them in a critical situation. While JobKeeper and JobSeeker offer a level of support for some sole trader artists, and the resilience funds at federal and state level offer to individual artists short-term assistance, for the sector at large, staffed extensively by casuals, the picture is bleak. The Victorian government stepped up and provided $16.8 million survival package, and other states, to an equal or less extent, provided some support, as did the Australia Council through its response package. And there is dedicated funding for artists in the regions, and foundations and benefactors have also initiated new grants. Indeed, a current malaise amongst artists and art workers is grant fatigue, because with so many small, relatively small sums, it has become a constant task in daily schedules to fill in an application. However, the tsunami of COVID-19 requires more support if the arts are to remain buoyant and sustainable. Before the pandemic, creative industries jobs were increasing at twice the rate of the rest of the Australian economy. Over the next couple of years, we will more likely see a steady decline. So is anybody doing it well? Well, in Germany, the federal government announced an aid package worth 50 billion euro, that's $80 billion Australian, for freelancers and small businesses, including a 5,000 euro payment for each individual freelancer. The foresight of the cultural minister, Monica Grütters, makes you weep for the lack of understanding and empathy from our politicians. As she so pertinently acknowledged, the cultural sector in particular is characterised by a high proportion of self-employed people who now have problems with their livelihoods. And, most significantly, the federal government is wholly aware of the importance of the creative industries, and help is coming quickly and with as little bureaucracy as possible. God bless you. The pandemic crisis has alerted us to cracks in the system. Although now saved due to philanthropic support and a New South Wales government rescue package, the announcement of the closure of Carriage Works in May sent shockwaves through the arts community, in part because Carriage Works' exposure to commercial pressures is replicated across the sector. Other major galleries such as Quag-Goma, NGV, NGA, Art Gallery New South Wales, MCA, all rely heavily on overseas visitors and ticket sales to blockbuster exhibitions. With that depletion in income and no immediate end in sight to the restrictions on travel, it is likely these institutions will need support as well. Now, many of our colleagues have spoken out to reiterate why the arts are important, why the reasons around health and well-being are acknowledged. It is practical economic benefits that will sway the politicians. We have the evidence. The World Economic Forum predicts that the skills associated with creative practice are the same that will be needed to drive the fourth industrial revolution. At the top there, you'll notice complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. Yet, this is also the time the government has doubled fees for humanities, which teaches these skills to all students. This is our greatest challenge, to convince government of the centrality of the arts to future economic prosperity and community health and well-being. Even before COVID-19, Australia was not making an appropriate investment in the cultural sector. We currently allocate only 0.75% of our GDP on recreation, culture and religion, while the OECD average is 1.11, and a figure which some countries have doubled. Instead of punishing the arts sector, we must convince government of the efficacy of following the Scandinavian lead and at least double our allocation to 1.5% of GDP. I said initially it wasn't all doom and gloom, and while the situation is no doubt grim, the role of the arts is so vital, it will continue to provide the solace, the vision, and the impetus for a community in shock. All of us have a role to play in convincing politicians and the wider community that support for artists, for art workers, and arts institutions is vital for the rebuilding of our economy and our communities. The arts have shown great resilience, and they've maintained an incredible level of productivity despite the constraints and restrictions of COVID-19, but it is not sustainable. So I will finish with the words of my new heroine, Monica Grütters, the culture minister from the Federal Republic of Germany, who said, "Our democratic society needs its unique and diverse culture and media landscape in this historic situation, which was unimaginable until recently. The creative courage of creative people can help to overcome the crisis. And that is why the following applies. Artists are not only indispensable, but also vital, especially now." Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ted, for really, I'm just so aware of how much we rely upon you to do the work that you do, and for being so generous in articulating those thoughts so beautifully. I would like to remind attendees that if you want to ask Ted a question, you can do that through the Q&A facility. And I might begin that process, Ted, with a question from myself. And it's really a question about, you know, big events like the Venice Biennale, for example. You know, what do you think the Venice Biennale looks like, given that nearly 36,000 people have died in Italy in the last 8 months? You know, if you could comment on that, that would be great.
David, I think it's everything that comes really from this crisis that we're living through, and it includes all the associated crises, like those people who are having to escape and find refuge in Europe. It is going to make a massive difference to how we think about what an exhibition of contemporary art looks like, how we're going to bring people together, how those resources are actually going to be allocated to things like exhibitions, to travel. We really have to rethink, and how it will look, I don't know. I don't have any crystal ball. But what I do hope most vehemently is that we will use the opportunities that we've been given through COVID-19, and I do see it as an opportunity to revalue, to recalibrate, to review what we've done in the past, not simply to carry it forward. I think Jim Morrison's statement was just such a beautiful comment. You know, normality is not actually going to protect anything other than some of the worst and the most invidious of the current ways in which we operate. We've got to think much more broadly. We've got to be much more creative, and we've actually got to be quite brave, quite courageous in revaluing what we think is important.
There's a question from Linda who says, there are many artists who operate outside of the marketplace. These artists have shown resilience throughout the pandemic. How important is the creation of art that might never be seen?
Oh, one of my favourite topics. Thank you, Linda. Well, I've just been working on the body of work, maybe 100,000 artworks created by a wonderful man called Ross Seaton. And it was not created to be seen by anybody, I don't think, but at the end of his life, he very graciously gave me permission to show it. But he simply made work because it was important that it was made, because there was an urgency that these ideas, these visual ideas needed to be made. So I think that is one of the great, you know, I'm particularly interested in that form of art practice. I think there are people who don't necessarily feel the need to have their art work made available to a wider audience. But there are those that do. And one of the great things about this COVID-19 and the use of this medium that we're using right today, plus Instagram and the internet, has been that more people have been able to reach out to audiences and to develop new audiences than have really ever been able to do before. And I think some of the innovations that I talked about, and some others that, of course, there are many others that I was unable to mention, will change the way in which artists engage with their audiences, engage with their clients, engage with their gallerists, and that will create a really different world, and hopefully a more inclusive and a more expansive one.
Simone asks, thank you so much, Ted, for this important work and for your reflections on the current crisis and for fighting this important fight. Art schools are an important part of the ecology of the art world, and I'd love to hear from you on the role of art schools in rebuilding our world post-COVID.
Thank you. A wonderful question. And really, at this time of crisis, we do have to wonder what is going to happen to art schools and universities. Universities are in crisis. We know that. We have just had the federal minister, increase the cost of students wishing to do humanities courses at a time when we need the skills more than ever. I do believe that art schools are absolutely vital, and how art schools are going to survive is going to be, I think, a much more collaborative effort. In the past, we've always been very proud of the differences between art schools, particularly in the same cities. And we've built a sort of a separation and a them and us mentality. I really believe, and it's only my belief, but it is something that I hold very dearly, that those of us who believe who trust in and know the value of an arts education, of a visual arts education, we're going to have to collaborate a lot more and create a much more coherent and homogenous community of collaborators both artists and art lecturers and students, if we're going to survive and make sure that the art schools are vital and vibrant throughout this really very, very difficult period. It's not going to be easy. It really isn't.
Just give a couple more moments for a couple more questions. This is such a meaty conversation to have this conversation. I mean, I'm particularly interested, Ted, in what you had to say about that, striking that balance of keeping a global outlook and not being too parochial, but at the same time, actually, and I'll go back and listen to this talk again, but you know, the idea that you can show a slide of an artist who probably most of us have not heard of, who hasn't been shown, and yet, you know, is part of a major festival. It's very exciting to be able to lift up the stones and the rocks and actually give a voice to so many artists who, yeah, I wonder if you could talk about that process, you know, in light of COVID-19.
Thanks, David, because I think it's going to be one of the tricky things that we deal with. There are many tricky things, but creating that balance between a focus on the local, which I celebrate wholeheartedly, but also being aware of what's happening globally, that's going to be quite tricky. But the fact that in the past we've thrown resources at any foreign artist, anybody who's coming from the outside is given all the resources that they require to present their work in the best possible way. Whereas often local artists are just expected to make do. You know, oh well, we've at least given them the space. We don't need to give them the monograph. We don't need to give them the big exhibition, the big install, the build, all of the public programs that go alongside. And I think if we need to respect our local artists in the way that actually Melbourne Now did and said, you know, this whole city is going to celebrate the artists of Melbourne. I hope that the Festival of Perth in 2021, and I know it will, that Gemma Weston has put together, will be a celebration of local practice. And that is a really good thing. Again, we mustn't become myopic or jingoistic. We can't just say, okay, we're going to close the borders, although we love doing that in Western Australia. We have to at least be open to ideas and to be accepting of ideas and look for that cross-fertilisation of ideas. But let's, for heaven's sake, use this as an opportunity to celebrate the local as well.
Mm-hmm. Ted, I've got one more question. I'm hoping I can do it justice. It says, it's from Lisa, and it's, how to double our percentage of GDP. Do you think government support for organisations to market, to build new audiences is enough? Or do they need to advocate for arts culture more vocally to generate a larger percentage of the public to shift to culture?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I think we have to do a big sell on why arts, what the arts bring to all aspects of society. We know that it has enormous value in health and well-being. That has been proved by COVID-19 better than any other possible mechanism. We know that it has a real impact on the economy. I showed you the figures. I mean, they are $112 billion that is brought in by the arts and culture sector, 6.5% of GDP. It has an impact. It can have greater impact. What we really have to do is to show that in every aspect, the arts are vital. And learning at high school, first of all, let's start at, you don't have to say preschool, because preschool know exactly that the arts are the means of communication. The kids learn because they dance and they sing and they make paintings and drawings. That is how they learn language. That is how they learn to interact. That is how they learn all of the skills about being a human being in a social environment. We don't have to worry about them. But from primary school and high school and then into university, we need to be able to give people the skills to visualize what a future, what a great, sustainable, vibrant future might be. So yeah, it is going to be a task. And I actually do believe it's all of us. All of us have to be a part of that. We can't just speak to each other. And one of the problems that, you know, I mean, we've spoken about this before, David, but one of the problems about the arts is that we often just speak to each other. It's a very closed community. We've got to start speaking to a much wider community to make sure that this message is really understood at both the government level, but at wider community levels as well.
I've got another question. This one's from Rose, and it says, is this the moment for university art museums to step in or step up to place, to a place that's too difficult and constrained for state institutions who are more reliant on government funding?
Absolutely. I think one of the great things about university art museums is that they always have taken that role. They have done the things that the state institutions haven't done. They have been safe places for dangerous ideas. They have taken risks. They have supported local practice in a way that very often the state institutions haven't. So yes, most definitely, Rose, there is a very, very important role for the university art museums. And again, in this difficult time, we have to be able to argue that they have a vital role in the ecology, the visual arts ecology and the arts ecology of this nation.
And the very last question, is it fair to ask artists to transform society when they're so underappreciated and under-resourced compared to those in a position who can actually transform society?
Has it always been the same? And that is one of the great things. It's both the great benefit of the arts and of course its great problem. As we've just seen, we've gone through a period of absolute crisis. Who stepped up? The artists. Who've maintained this sense of well-being for a community? The artists. Who have given freely of their time and energy? The artists. Will they get the benefit? This is what we really have to make sure. This is one of the things that one of the lessons, not only that we have to learn, but we have to ensure that is encased in all thinking that happens post-COVID-19, that we ensure that the arts are given the respect that they have deserved and they have shown in this COVID-19 crisis.
Ted, we're going to leave it there, but the comments, we'll get some of them to you, but it's just been so inspiring to share some Zoom space with you and with our community, and to hear your thoughts articulated so clearly, and for you to make links right across a range of histories and times and places about the nature of art and the role that artists can play, not just within the development of curatorship or museums or artistic practice, but actually woven really enmeshed in the fabric of society and the kind of evolution of whatever's next or whatever's growing for the planet. And I thank you so much on behalf of everyone for really taking us to all of the places that you took us in this talk. Thank you. Please, wherever you are, thank Professor Ted Snell. And to everybody who joined us, thank you so much for being with us. Our guest speaker next week for Art Forum is Bruce Pascoe, and we hope you'll join us 12:30 next Thursday, and you'll receive notification about that. So goodbye, everyone, and thank you again, Ted. Cheers.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.